Now I am 36 years old, still full of vigor and youthful energy. I have a trim body and I am still beautiful. And now that my son is 20 years old, it seems that I have begun to fall in love with my son's friend. To understand how I got to this point, listen to the story from the beginning. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I was beautiful. It wasn't vanity or self-confidence, just a fact as obvious as the color of my eyes or the length of my hair. People around me always paid attention to my appearance, women smiled, men cast long glances at me, and children said I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. This attention became an integral part of my life, like sunlight or the sound of rain outside my window. I took it for granted and didn't pay much attention to it. Even at school, I was the girl that all the boys secretly loved. They wrote me notes trying to win my attention, brought me chocolates and flowers, but I remained indifferent. Deep down, I knew it was all temporary. Beauty attracted them, but it was a superficial admiration that had no real foundation. I always dreamed of something more, of the one and only true love that would be deeper than mere external perception, that would touch my heart and soul. I was waiting for someone who would love me not only for my beauty, but also for what I am as a person, for my thoughts, feelings, aspirations. When I entered the university, a new world opened before me. It was a world full of freedom, opportunities and meetings with amazing versatile people. Here I found myself in the center of attention more than ever before. Not only because of my looks, but also because I could communicate more, express myself, develop. At university, it seemed like there were even more admirers. They were older, more experienced, their interest in me became more diverse. I enjoyed this attention, bathed in it as if in the rays of the sun, but something in me changed. I no longer wanted to be just a beautiful doll, in which they see only appearance. It was important to me to be valued for my mind, for my inner world, for what I thought and felt. I longed for real connection, real understanding, and that's when Andre came into my life. He was very different from the other men around me. Instead of seeking to wow me like others did, he was calm, reserved, but confident. He had a deep, thoughtful look in his brown eyes, and he spoke to me in a way that no one else had ever spoken to me before. He didn't shower me with compliments or seek to win me over, nor did he do anything to impress me. Instead, he was just being himself, honest, direct, open. We could talk for hours about books, about music, about life. His words moved me, his thoughts were so deep and meaningful that I felt for the first time. This was the man I was looking for. I realized that this was what I had always been waiting for, love based not on admiration for beauty, but on mutual understanding, respect, and closeness of souls. And I fell in love with him sincerely without looking back. Our romance developed rapidly like a hurricane, which picked us up and swirled us in a whirlpool of feelings. We were young, full of energy and passion, and every day with Andre was a real holiday for me. Time flew by unnoticed, and every minute spent together seemed like a small discovery. We learned more and more about each other, and it was like a journey through uncharted lands. In each of his features, each word, each look, I found something new and amazing. We talked until late at night, we couldn't get enough of each other, each time finding new topics to talk about, new thoughts to share. We walked the streets holding hands, and I felt that the whole world existed only for the two of us. Everything else lost its importance: work, studies, everyday life. Everything was somewhere far away, in another dimension, not important and secondary, because in the center of my universe was only Andrew. When I found out that I was pregnant, it was a real shock for me. I was only 20 years old, I hadn't finished my studies yet, and my life seemed to have just begun. I was making plans for the future, career, traveling, new experiences. Pregnancy was not part of those plans, and in the first moments it was hard for me to realize that everything would change. I sat in silence, looking at the pregnancy test, not knowing how to tell Andre about it. Fear and anxiety filled me. How would he react? What would he say? We've only been together a few months. It's too early for such a serious step, I thought. But Andre's reaction amazed me. When I showed him the test with trembling hands and told him I was pregnant, he was not confused. Instead of shock or confusion as I expected, he put his arms around me, pulled me tight against him, and whispered in my ear, "We'll get through this. Together we'll get through this." There was no fear or doubt in his eyes, just confidence and love. He kissed my forehead, telling me that we would make it through, that everything would be okay. Those words spilled over into my soul like a bomb, relieving the tension and doubts. At that moment I realized that with such a man I could go through anything. 6 months after that conversation we got married. Pregnancy turned out to be much more difficult than I expected. For the first few months I was suffering from severe toxicosis, and almost every day started with me fighting nausea. I felt a constant fatigue that even long hours of sleep could not relieve. My moods changed with incredible speed. One moment I could be laughing, enjoying life, and the next minute I could be crying for no apparent reason. These emotional swings scared me, and sometimes I didn't understand what was happening to my body and why I couldn't control my feelings. But in those difficult moments, Andre was my anchor. He was always there, ready to support, hug, comfort. He patiently listened to my complaints, went with me to all medical examinations, listened carefully to doctors' recommendations, did not miss any course that concerned pregnancy or child care. His care was incredible, and I felt like he was willing to do anything for our future child. He even learned how to cook a few meals that I could eat when almost everything else made me sick. These were small but very important moments that showed how much he cared for me. I remember one night when I couldn't sleep again because of the agonizing nausea. He got out of bed and made me some herbal tea, sat next to me and held my hand until I fell asleep. There were many moments like that, and each one of them strengthened my faith that together we could overcome any difficulty. Childbirth was a real challenge for me. It lasted long hours and I thought the process would never end. The pain was so intense that it seemed that I would not be able to endure a second more. Each contraction was like a new wave of pain rolling in and overwhelming me. I clutched Andre's hand trying to find some comfort, but even his support couldn't completely dull the physical agony I was going through. Sometimes I felt as if my strength was leaving me, that I just wouldn't be able to continue. But Andre was with me the whole time, never leaving my side. His presence gave me strength. He told me that I could cope, that I was strong, that all this would soon be over and we would finally see our baby. And then when I was about to give up hope, I heard our son's first cry. That sound was like salvation, like a light at the end of a long tunnel. All my fears, all my pain disappeared in an instant when they placed him on my chest. I looked at the little body, so fragile but full of life, and tears of happiness came to my eyes. It was a moment that changed my whole life. I looked at this little creature lying in my arms, so helpless, but at the same time so perfect. His tiny hands, his soft hair so fine and fluffy like golden threads, his big open blue eyes. Everything about him seemed like a miracle to me. I felt my heart fill with an endless pure love like I had never known before. A love that took my breath away and brought tears to my eyes. At that moment, looking at Maxim, I realized that everything I had gone through, all the suffering, pain, fears, were insignificant compared to this little miracle, which became the meaning of my life. We thought about a name for our son for a long time, and finally we decided on Maxim. This name seemed perfect for us, strong, noble, suitable for the person we wanted our son to be. From the very birth he was an amazingly beautiful child, as if he came from a postcard. Everyone said he looked like me, with the same big blue eyes, soft, almost transparent skin and golden hair. But despite these comparisons, I saw Andre's features in him too. When Maxim smiled, his lips would curl up in the same way as Andre's, and his gaze would sometimes have the same thoughtful depth that I loved so much about my husband. It was amazing and touching to see in your child a mixture of yourself and the person you love. The first few months after Maxim was born were like a blur. I, like many young mothers, could not immediately get used to the new role, to the endless responsibilities that came upon me. Every night was filled with sleepless hours. Feeding, swaddling, rocking, and all this against the background of constant sleep deprivation and fatigue. I remember sitting in the chair rocking Maxim, and my eyelids would close by themselves, because I was so tired that I couldn't hold on any longer. Sometimes I thought I would collapse from exhaustion, that I had no more strength. But every time I looked at my son, at his calm face as he fell asleep, all my difficulties receded. His presence gave me strength that I had not known in myself before. Andre, as always, was there for me and helped me in everything. He understood that I needed support, and never left me alone in those difficult moments. He not only took care of Maxim but also of me. He could play with my son for hours, entertain him while I was resting. I remember how at night Andre would get out of bed to take Maxim in his arms if he started crying and quietly carry him to another room so that I could sleep at least a little. He learned to sing lullabies, made up funny stories to distract the baby, walked with him outside while I was recovering. His care and involvement made me even more confident that I had made the right choice when I connected my life with this man. Gradually, our life began to fall into a new direction. I returned to my studies, although it was much more difficult than I thought it would be. It was a real challenge to combine university and motherhood. Every day I had to balance between lectures, homework and taking care of Maxim. Sometimes it seemed that my strength was not enough for everything, that I was lost in these constant affairs. But I had a goal and I wasn't going to give up. I wanted to prove to myself and others that I could be not only a beautiful wife and mother, but also a successful man who does not give up his dreams and plans for the sake of his family. I wanted to be an example for my son, to show him that everything is possible in life if you have the desire and support of your loved ones. Time passed and Maxim grew up before my eyes. He turned out to be an amazingly inquisitive and active child. He had so much energy and desire to learn the world that sometimes I could hardly keep up with his new discoveries. He loved to explore everything around him, from toys to books, from vacuum cleaner to furniture. His eyes lit up with joy every time he found something new. I watched him taking his first tentative steps, falling, immediately getting up and trying to walk again, and it made me infinitely proud. Maxim's first words were so funny, and I couldn't get excited about every new achievement he made. In those moments I felt my heart ready to burst with love, and I realized that being a mother is the greatest happiness one can experience. Our married life seemed perfect. Andre and I were still in love with each other as we were in the first days of our acquaintance. We talked a lot, shared our thoughts, dreams, and plans for the future. We made big plans. We dreamed of buying a house big and cozy, where every member of our family would feel comfortable. We wanted to travel, to show Maxim the world, to give him the best. We discussed how we would bring him up, what values we would instill in him, and also talked about the fact that we might want to have another child in the future. However, as time went by, I started to notice that something was changing. Andre became more withdrawn and aloof. He spent less time at home, citing his workload. He said that he needed to work more to provide for us so that we could have everything we wanted. I tried to understand him, to be supportive, to not make complaints. I thought that these were just temporary difficulties related to his career, that with time everything would get better and he would become like he used to be. When Maxim turned 5, we organized a big holiday for him. It was a special day, which we prepared in advance and with great love. We invited all his friends from kindergarten, as well as our friends with their children. The house was decorated with balloons and garlands. There were tents with treats outside. And to entertain the children we invited clowns who organized fun games and contests. Maxim was delighted, his eyes shone with happiness. He was running among his friends, laughing, playing, and I was happy to see him so satisfied. The culmination of the holiday was a huge cake with his favorite cartoon characters, and when Maxim was presented with the cake, he blew out the candles, making a wish, and at that moment I felt like the happiest mother in the world. But in the evening, when the guests left and Maxim fell asleep, tired from the experience, Andre said that we needed to talk. I remember how my heart sank. I felt that something irreparable was about to happen. We were sitting in the kitchen, and Andre was silent for a long time, not looking me in the eyes. And then he started talking. He said that he felt unhappy, that it seemed to him as if he had lost himself in this family life, that he loved Maxim and me, but that he could no longer live the way we did. I listened to him and I thought it was some kind of scary dream. I couldn't believe it was really happening. I tried to object, talking about our love, about our plans, about Maxim, but Andre was adamant. He said we better break up. That night was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I just lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, trying to realize what had happened. How come my perfect life had fallen apart like a house of cards? Andre and I were trying to decide how to live our lives, how to tell Maxim about everything. It was agonizing to see how our son did not understand why Dad no longer lived with us, why Mom often cried. Andre moved out, taking some of his things. He promised to help financially, promised to see Maxim often. But I knew that our life would never be the same again. First I felt completely lost. It seemed to me that I couldn't cope, that I couldn't be a good single mother. But gradually I began to find my strength. For Maxim's sake, for my own sake. I remembered that once I was not only beautiful, but also strong, intelligent, purposeful. I decided that I wouldn't let this situation break me. I returned to my studies, which I had abandoned after Maxim's birth. I found a job that allowed me to combine my career and taking care of my son. Maxim. He was my anchor, my salvation. Looking at him, I realized that I had no right to give up. He needed me strong, confident, able to protect him and teach him everything I know. It had been several years since Andre had left. I learned to live without him, learned to be happy on my own. Yes, sometimes it can be hard and lonely. But when I look at Maxim, when I see what a wonderful boy he is growing up to be, I realize that everything was not in vain. I am no longer that naive beauty who thought that looks were the main thing. I am a woman who went through pain and disappointment, but found the strength to get up and move on. I am a mother who would do anything for her child. And you know what? I'm still beautiful. But now my beauty isn't just my looks. It's the strength I've found within myself. It's the wisdom I've gained. It's the love I give my son every day. I don't know what lies ahead. Maybe I will meet a new man who will love me and Maxim. Or maybe I'll live this life alone. But I know one thing, I'll manage. Because now I know my real value. And it's not measured by beauty or having a man around. A lot of time has passed since I made the decision to live for myself and Maxim. I decided not to look for a new man, at least until my son goes to university. It was a conscious decision, dictated not by fear or resentment of men, and the desire to devote all my time and energy to raising my son and self-development. The years flew by imperceptibly. Maxim grew and changed before my eyes. From a small boy he turned into a tall, stately young man. I was proud to watch his successes at school, how his character was forming. He inherited my determination and Andrei's persistence, which allowed him to become one of the best students in the class. All this time I focused on work and self-education. I got a second higher education and made a good career in a marketing agency. Colleagues respected me for my professionalism, not for my looks, and this gave me confidence in myself. Personal life. To be honest, I had almost forgotten what it was. There were, of course, men who showed interest in me, but I always found reasons not to develop a relationship. It was work or Maxim needed attention or simply not my man. Over time I realized that I was just afraid. I was afraid to open up again, to trust, and then to go through the pain of parting. And then came the long-awaited moment. Maxim entered university. I remember how we were preparing for the exams together, how anxious we were waiting for the results. And then the joy when the confirmation of enrollment came. I was so proud of my son. The first weeks after Maxim left for the hostel were not easy for me. The house suddenly seemed empty and quiet. I caught myself thinking that I didn't know what to do to fill the time I had left. My whole life had been centered around my son for the past few years, and now I felt lost. But gradually I began to get used to the new rhythm of life. I started to devote more time to myself. I joined a gym, started taking foreign language courses. I realized that now I had an opportunity to realize the dreams that I had been putting off all these years. Maxim often called me, telling me about his new life at the university. I listened to him with interest, enjoying his successes and new impressions. He quickly found friends, actively participated in student life. Sometimes he invited his new buddies to our house, and I enjoyed cooking for them, listening to their conversations and laughter. One day, when Maxim brought another group of friends, I caught the interested look of one of them. It was a tall, dark-haired guy named Artem. He stood out among the others with his seriousness and intelligence. We got to talking, and I was surprised to find that I enjoyed talking to him. Time passed, and our communication became closer and closer. Artem often came to see Maxim and me, and each time I noticed more and more how he stood out from Maxim's other friends with his reasonableness and calmness. We talked alone more and more often, discussing books, movies, and university affairs. He turned out to be an amazingly well-read and intelligent conversationalist, and I caught myself thinking that I was waiting for his arrival, not for the general noise of the company. One day Artem and Maxim were working on an important university project that was due in a few days. They stayed up late trying to meet the deadline. Maxim, in his usual manner, was a little distracted, but Artem worked with concentration, fully immersed in the task. At some point I decided not to interrupt them, but I did offer a little help. I brought them tea and fresh cakes I just baked. They accepted the treat gratefully, but didn't even seem to notice my presence, so busy were they with their work. The night was getting deeper and deeper, and I wanted to go to rest, but they kept working. I decided to leave them alone with the project and headed for the bathroom. It was late, and out of habit I didn't lock the door. The warm water gently touched my skin, relaxing the tension of the day. I immersed myself in my thoughts, felt the warm jets of water wash away my fatigue, and even aroused myself a little from the pleasant sensations. My body relaxed and my thoughts slowly drifted away. Suddenly, the bathroom door slowly opened. My first reaction was consternation, but I froze in place, not knowing how to react. Standing in the doorway was Artem, sleepy and clearly confused. He probably just wanted to wash up, not expecting me to be there. Our gazes met for a moment, and I saw his confusion. He looked like he didn't immediately realize what had happened, and then his eyes rounded when he saw me in the shower. I abruptly grabbed the curtain, trying to hide, but the moment was already gone. He'd seen me in time. We were both silent for a few seconds, tension in the air. Suddenly I realized that this incident might not have been as unpleasant as it had seemed at first. The thought flashed through my mind that this was my chance to be alone with Artem. The accumulated fatigue, the warm water, and his sudden appearance seemed to disable all my inner barriers. Artem. My voice trembled with excitement, but I gathered all my courage. Can you rub my back? He froze, clearly not expecting such a suggestion, and I noticed his face changed a little. The confusion was replaced by something else, something deeper. Without saying a word, Artem stepped closer, and his hands gently touched my skin. I felt goosebumps run through my body, and my heart began to beat faster. His touch was hesitant at first, but gradually became more confident. I closed my eyes, savoring every moment, feeling my thoughts dissolve into this intimate interaction. His hand slid down my back, and every gesture seemed so natural. as if everything that was happening was inevitable. The silence, broken only by the sound of the water, made the moment even more special. It took a while before we both realized that just rubbing our backs wasn't going to stop the passion that was brewing between us. We started moving closer and closer to each other, our bodies touching, and at that moment the boundaries between us disappeared completely. Artem looked into my eyes, and I saw in his gaze a desire mixed with the same excitement I felt. We spent more than an hour together, forgetting about everything about the project, about the fact that Maxim was sleeping in the other room, about all the rules and prohibitions. Our intimacy was tender and reverent, but at the same time filled with passion that we couldn't hold back. When it was over, we both felt happy and a little confused. After the water stopped pouring and we finally got out of the tub, I realized that it wasn't just a random moment. Something had changed between us, and it wasn't just physical attraction. Artem and I silently walked back to the living room, where scattered study materials and unfinished cups of tea were still lying around. We exchanged brief glances, and I saw in his eyes what I felt myself, a mixture of surprise, joy, and the realization that something more than just a random incident had happened. After waking up in the morning as if nothing had happened, Artem and Maxim quickly cleaned themselves up and joined me for breakfast. I watched them from the sidelines, trying to catch the slightest sign of awkwardness between Artem and me after that night, but everything seemed familiar. Artem kept his cool as if nothing had happened, and I decided not to let it show. They had a quick breakfast and got right to work on the project because the deadline was today. By mid-afternoon, after hours of hard work, they had finally completed every last detail. It was obvious that the guys were happy with their work. Maxim exhaled with relief, smiled, and they hurried to the university to turn in the project. I watched them leave the house, and my heart squeezed again at the thought of Artem. Memories of that night kept me awake, and I realized more and more that my feelings for him were growing stronger. 2 weeks passed, and during that time I never stopped thinking about him. Every day the memories came back, his touch, his gaze, that moment in the bathroom. I couldn't ignore my feelings anymore. Artem was constantly present in my thoughts, and for the first time in a long time I felt how it was to love again. But everything was complicated by the fact that Artem remained Maxim's best friend. I didn't know how to go on, but it was becoming impossible to keep it all inside. One evening, unable to bear it, I decided to write to Artem. At first I hesitated for a long time, afraid that he might not answer or even refuse to communicate with me. But finally, I gathered courage and wrote him a simple message. "Hi, how are you? Why don't we go for a walk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for his reply, and when the notification came with his agreement, I felt a wave of relief and joy. We agreed to meet at the park in a couple days. When the day of our meeting came, I was full of excitement and uncertainty, but at the same time overflowing with joy. We met at the appointed place. Artem looked as calm and confident as always. We began to walk slowly through the alleys of the park, discussing university affairs, the weather, and anything else to hide our inner excitement. But the tension between us was growing, and I felt that talking couldn't hide the feelings we were both experiencing. We walked almost the entire park, and Artem offered to walk me home. On the way, we were silent more than we talked, but this silence wasn't awkward, it was filled with anticipation of something more. As we approached my house, I felt like I couldn't just let him go. At that moment, on the threshold of my house, I took a step towards Artem and without thinking, kissed him. It was a tender, but at the same time full of passion kiss. Artem did not pull away, on the contrary, he responded to my kiss, and at that moment all my doubts and fears disappeared. I realized that he felt the same way. That kiss was the beginning of what I had been afraid to admit for so long, our relationship. From then on, our meetings became more frequent. We could no longer pretend that there was nothing between us. Our relationship gradually grew stronger, and I felt that Artem was getting closer and closer. We met secretly, trying not to advertise our feelings. Artem was also worried about Maxim because he remained his close friend, and we both realized that sooner or later we would have to confess. But for now Maxim didn't suspect anything, and it gave us time to enjoy what we had. Every time we met filled me with happiness and excitement at the same time. I was afraid of the moment when it would all come out, but I couldn't stop myself. Artem became more than just an infatuation for me. He became someone I thought about every morning and fell asleep thinking about him. We spent long walks together, dinners in small cafes, and sometimes we just sat together in the park, enjoying the silence in each other's company. A few months had passed since the beginning of our secret relationship, and the tension between us was getting worse and worse. We both knew it couldn't go on forever. One day, after another meeting, when Artem was walking me home again, he took my hand and said quietly, "We can't go on like this." His voice was full of regret. "Maxim will find out sooner or later anyway. I can't do this to him." I knew what he was talking about. We both knew that betraying a friend was serious. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine my life without Artem. My feelings for him were too strong to just stop. I know, I answered, looking into his eyes. But I can't stop it either. We're both in it. We fell silent, standing on the threshold, and I felt like a decision had to be made soon. Artem squeezed my hand harder, as if trying to find in this moment the answer to all our questions. From that day on, our relationship began to feel strained. Artem started coming less often, and I could feel that he was suffering. Maxim still didn't notice anything, but I knew it was only a matter of time. One day, when Artem came to see me again, I noticed that he was immersed in his thoughts. He seemed distracted, and his gaze often wandered somewhere in the distance. I can't go on like this, he said, finally breaking the silence. We need to tell Maxim. It's the honest thing to do. Those words stabbed me in the heart. I knew he was right, but the fear of losing Maxim and ruining everything we had was scaring me to the core. I decided not to tell Maxim anything. I asked Artyom to wait until after graduation. There were only a few months left, and then when he found a job, we could move in together. Nevertheless, during this time we continued to meet on neutral territory. Sometimes it was walks in parks, sometimes meetings in cafes. Every time I saw Artyom, everything trembled inside me. But there was always the shadow of the fact that it was wrong for us to hide our relationship. Those 2 months before graduation dragged on for an excruciatingly long time. I felt more and more like I was living two lives. On the one hand, there was Maxim, who seemed content and didn't seem to notice the changes. On the other was Artyom, with whom I felt truly alive. The time I spent with him was full of emotion, passion, and understanding. But deep down I knew that it couldn't last forever. When Maxim's studies were over, unexpectedly for me, he informed me that he did not plan to look for a job right away. Instead, he decided to enroll in a master's program in another city. At first glance, this was a real salvation for our situation. I sincerely supported him in this decision, trying not to show my relief. Maxim went to another city for a few years, and now that he was gone, Artyom could finally come to my house. I felt freer than ever, though somewhere deep down there was still a shadow of guilt. With Artyom, we started spending a lot more time together. He was finally able to fully become a part of my life. We had dinner together, watched movies, discussed plans for the future. Everything seemed so natural that I sometimes forgot that I had once been with Maxim. But the more time we spent together, the clearer it became to me that our relationship with Artyom was more than just infatuation or passion. It was something more, something that required serious decisions. Artyom began to hint that he wanted more. He was ready to offer me a life together, talking about children, about how we could organize our common life. And although it scared me, I couldn't deny that I liked it too. Everything was fine until I heard from Maxim. He told me that his studies in the master's program were going well, but there was an opportunity to go on an internship in Europe for a few months. I was happy for him, but the news made me wonder how much longer I would be able to hide the truth. A few more months passed. Artyom grew more and more attached to me, our relationship deepened, and I felt that it wasn't just a fling. Deep down, I knew that Maxim was no longer the man I could be happy with. Too much had changed in those months, and I realized that I couldn't live a lie anymore. One evening, sitting with Artyom in the kitchen, I decided to have a frank conversation. You know, I can't go on like this, I began, nervously rubbing the edge of the tablecloth. I feel like we need to make a change. I can't keep hiding our relationship from Maxim anymore. Artyom looked at me seriously, his face becoming tense. Do you want to tell him everything? He asked, trying to understand my intentions. Yes, I exhaled. I couldn't stand it anymore. I love you, Artyom, and I want to be with you without hiding. But to do that, I need to finish with Maxim. Artyom nodded, his eyes softening. I realize it's hard, but I'll be there for you. No matter how it turns out, we'll get through this together. This conversation was a turning point for me. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The next day I decided to talk to Maxim, albeit remotely. Our conversation took place via video link. I was nervous and dialed his number with trembling fingers. Maxim was in a good mood, talking about his successes and plans for the future. And so when the moment came, I made up my mind. Maxim, I have something to tell you, I began. It's not easy and maybe you won't understand me, but I have to be honest. He looked at me puzzled but remained calm. What's the matter? Did something happen? He asked. Yes, something happened, I answered, trying to pull myself together. I can't keep it from you anymore. A lot of things have changed in my life lately, and I met another man. Maxim was silent, his face gradually changing. It reflected shock, disappointment, and pain. Are you serious? He finally said it. Are you saying you've been with someone else this whole time? Yes, I confirmed, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want this to happen. But our relationship has changed. I can't go on living in deceit any longer. Maxim was silent for a long time, then sighed heavily. After this conversation, I felt devastated. Even though I had made the right move, the pain and guilt still remained. I knew it would be hard for Maxim to accept this, and that I had broken his heart. But now I could be honest with myself and with Artyom. I want to apologize for any mistakes in the text or dubbing. I am just learning, and the language of this channel is not my mother tongue. The dubbing is done with the help of artificial intelligence. Please point out errors so I can fix them and improve the quality of the content. Also, I will be glad if you share your thoughts on the topic. Your support in the comments is very motivating for me to keep looking for new interesting stories. Thank you for your understanding and participation. Subscribe to the channel and put a bell to not miss new stories.